Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar for the National Science Foundation's Improving Undergraduate STEM Education Program, or as we call it, the IUSE program, in the Education and Human Resources Directorate at NSF. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sandra Richardson, and I am a program officer in the Division of Undergraduate Education at NSF, and IUSE is one of the programs that I work in. I'm fortunate today to be joined by my colleague, Kathleen Bergen, whose voice you will hear next. Kathleen is also a program officer in the Division of Undergraduate Education at NSF and works in the IUSE program as well. In today's webinar, we will provide you with some general information about the IUSE program as identified in Solicitation 19-601. But I do want to highlight that the focus of today's webinar is primarily on pre-service teacher preparation. So while IUSE is a program that supports efforts across many aspects of undergraduate education, today the focus of the webinar is particularly on pre-service teachers. And we want to engage with you, those who are interested in possibly submitting an IUSE proposal where pre-service teachers or pre-service teacher educators are the focus of the proposal. Also, I'll note that IUSE has multiple levels, as you will hear more about today in the webinar. And the webinar today is primarily focused on levels 2 and 3, which have a proposal submission date of December 1st. Before we actually begin with content for the webinar, let's just take care of a few housekeeping items. First, if you need any technical assistance at any time during the webinar, you can click or enter a question using the question and answer tab on the left of your screen. You may also use the red test your connection function to test your system, but you can also reach out for tech support using that function as well. We welcome questions throughout the webinar today. So please use the question and answer feature or input selection to input questions. Note that you will only be able to see your question and not all questions that are inputted. So don't think anything is wrong if you're only seeing your question. Kathleen and I will answer your questions as they come in, but sometimes we may want to actually save a question until our dedicated question and answer session time, where we will, verbally share your question with the group as a whole and answer it. We will answer as many questions as possible using the question and answer chat feature box. However, again, note that we'll have some dedicated time where we will select questions, and I think we have 3 question and answer session times dedicated. So put your thinking caps on and get some questions ready for us. In the event that your question is not answered today, either verbally or in a written response, feel free to follow up with either Kathleen Bergen or follow up with me via email anytime after today's webinar. I also just want to let you know that the session today is actually being recorded. You will receive a link with the recording of the webinar, which will include the slides. Sometime within the next 24 to 48 hours, so just be on the lookout for that. So I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague, Kathleen, who will take it away.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. And so we're going to start off with some questions, which you can just answer mentally for yourself. Are you interested in making changes at your institution to improve STEM learning and engagement for students? Okay, we got a yes on that. Are you interested in using assessments to enhance what is known about effective STEM teaching and learning practices? Is that something you'd like to do? Again, a yes. And considering the implications of the aforementioned factors for pre-service STEM teacher preparation, is this something that you are concerned about? Another yes. Stay tuned. because today is your lucky day. So here are the webinar topics. First, we'll talk about the IUSE, the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education program. And then what do you want to do? And then a description including, as Sandra mentioned, there are tracks and levels. We'll go into that detail. Additional program details you want to attend to, a few tips for success, and some additional resources. And as Sandra mentioned, there'll be 3 Q&A sessions, but we encourage you, as you have questions, go ahead and put them in the question tab. So let's talk about the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education program. Think about what you have been longing to do to improve STEM pre-service education. Write down 3 things you've been longing to do that require financial resources. Now, if you prefer to write with an old-fashioned pen or pencil on paper, go for it. If you prefer to type in your computer or your iPad or your cell phone, do that. But actually write down 3 things that you need funding to do. I don't know if I've given you enough wait time for 3 things, but hopefully you've at least got 1 or 2 and your brain is thinking about more. Your innovative pre-service idea is your response, and it's here. Because pretty much in the IUSE program, we can provide you and your institution financial resources to make the changes and improvements you've been wishing you could make to improve STEM pre-service education. So then you probably have a question about whether your idea could be funded, and I'll tell you, the answer is yes. If you write a compelling proposal, there's almost nothing that we can't fund with IUSE. Faculty development, curriculum changes, new course design, new assessments, data collection, the list goes on. So IUSE seeks to improve the quality and effectiveness of education of undergraduates, including pre-service teachers in all STEM fields. So it could be pre-service teachers in mathematics, pre-service teachers that are coming from the engineering perspective, computer science, all of these. IUSE seeks to improve undergraduate STEM teaching and learning for all students and institutional environments. And here again, you could focus in on, there are students that you particularly wish you had more supports for. And I'm not talking about scholarship support. I'm talking about, could be co-curricular supports that would help, or curricular supports, or changing the environment in which they're learning. By the way, both Sandra and I will continue to emphasize pre-service teacher education, but everything we're saying here would be true if you wanted to submit nothing related to teacher prep, but just related to improving undergraduate biology or undergraduate geoscience. But we're really emphasizing teacher education because we're hoping that's what you're here about. So there are 3 overarching goals. One is to build knowledge about STEM teaching and learning at the undergraduate level. So we want your work to build knowledge. So you can develop novel, creative, and transformative approaches to undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. A second goal is to incorporate evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning for all undergraduates. So you're going to want to look to the research literature to draw upon evidence-based practices. You can adapt, you can improve, you can replicate, you can incorporate evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning. And the program is interested that you build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education. Think about what is needed to lay the groundwork for sustained departmental, institutional, or community transformation and improvement. By the way, your proposal doesn't have to focus on all three of these areas, but you certainly want to focus on one or more. As mentioned earlier, there are two program tracks. One is Engaged Student Learning. You may also see us just say ESL. And this is a focus on development, testing, use of research-based practices, curricular innovations, any of these that will engage students and improve their learning and persistence and retention in STEM disciplines. This can also include, as I mentioned before, faculty development, curricular development, development of assessments, but all in service of supporting students in STEM. We also have the institutional and community transformation track. This focuses more on actually creating sustained changes in colleges and universities across departments to implement and sustain highly effective STEM teaching and learning. So one track is focused very much on the support of students, and the other track, while supporting students, is talking about how do you change the culture, the environment in which the students can thrive and celebrate as STEM majors and pre-service STEM candidates. So this is a sample of the Engaged Student Learning project themes, but don't be limited by this. As mentioned earlier, you can do assessments on learning and practice, particularly in pedagogical courses. You can do educational research on best practices, again, in STEM teacher preparation. Conduct undergraduate disciplinary research in pre-service teacher education, drawing upon the research base in DEBR. Develop the STEM and STEM-related workforce. Of course, this includes teachers, but as I mentioned earlier, IUSE is not a scholarship program. We do have some other programs for that. Educating a STEM literate population, including STEM teachers, but you can go to non-majors as well as STEM majors, because all students that graduate from college need to be STEM literate. Broadening participation, including the participation of a more diverse pool of STEM teachers. Exploring co-curricular activities to increase student motivation and persistence in STEM teaching. STEM faculty professional development, as I mentioned earlier. And this could be for disciplinary faculty members, those that are chemists themselves, but as well as those who are preparing teachers to be chemistry teachers. Ultimately, building capacity in higher education. And again, because we're focusing on STEM teacher preparation, we call that to your attention. Now, those were examples of engaged student learning themes. Again, not limited to that. These are examples of institutional and community transformation themes, where you're trying to bring about change across departments or colleges or even across several institutions of higher education. Technology and distance education methods, very timely right now in this age of pandemic, including in STEM and in pedagogy courses for teachers. Institutional STEM planning efforts and investigations of evidence-based practices for institutional strategic planning and faculty rewards. We often hear individuals and institutions saying the faculty reward system is not supportive of evidence-based practices. Well, here's an opportunity to garner some financial resources to work on that. STEM faculty professional development, as I mentioned earlier, and the development of instruments. In this case, these instruments and metrics would be about shifting the institution or departments towards evidence-based teaching practices. In other words, how are you going to know that you've made this transformation? Another theme is research studies on approaches for advancing change in the STEM undergraduate community, including teacher preparation. You may have other themes, and we encourage you to pursue those because there are opportunities here for you to garner the financial resources that can pay for your time to be able to do this. We encourage collaborations among STEM disciplinary instructors, among departments and institutional administrators, and among education researchers. It's not that you have to have all of these present, but you're certainly going to want to have some of them present. And who do you need? You need those that are necessary to do the work and bring about the improvements that you are aiming for. You'll see project elements. You need to build on a knowledge base. You're going to need an evaluation plan for the project, or at least some objective feedback mechanism, could be an advisory board. You must have either a project evaluation plan or a research plan. You must have one or the other. You're certainly welcome to have both, but you must have one or the other because you need to generate knowledge. You must include a dissemination plan. How are others going to learn from and benefit from the work that you're doing? NSF does not have the financial resources to fund every institution to do what that institution wishes to do. We must learn from the work that you do, and then that's why it's important to have a dissemination plan. And then you should include sustainability. You garner the financial resources, you do the work. How is that work going to persist after the financial resources are gone?
Kathleen, I'll just hop in and say I think we skipped slide 13, which is the question and answer slide. So it may be a good time to pause and see if we have any questions.
I apologize. I didn't see it, but I'll back up to it.
Okay. Yeah, no problem at all.
I don't know. I apologize. Go ahead.
No need to apologize at all. So there are two questions that I've highlighted. I've answered a few in the chat, but there are two that I think would benefit from a larger discussion. I'll let you take the first one. I can take the second one. So the first one says, I prepare elementary teachers. They are not STEM majors. They are elementary ed majors who will teach all subjects. So how can they be a part of an IUSE project? Does it matter that they are not STEM majors?
Perfect question. So glad to get it. It does not matter that they are not STEM majors. They are undergraduates, and they are preparing to teach. And as the questioner indicates, they're going to have to teach all subjects, which includes math, and science. So the work that would be proposed would be focusing on the mathematics and science portion of their preparation. But absolutely, we welcome that.
Yeah, perfect. Another question is, do we have to have education faculty to collaborate on this project if I'm a STEM faculty member? At my institution, the STEM pre-service teacher education is under the Division of Education, not Arts and Science. So I'll just say on the slide that immediately before we started answering questions, Kathleen had a bullet that talked about collaboration. So we strongly encourage collaborations across disciplinary boundaries, depending on what makes sense for the project, but there is no requirement that someone from a STEM college as well as an education college has to be represented on the faculty team that makes up the leadership team. So there's no requirement to have an education faculty member, but certainly if it makes sense based on what you're proposing, we would encourage it and certainly welcome it.
Sandra, can I add a little something to that?
Please do.
I always suggest, or we always suggest, that you also put your reviewer hat on. So if you were reviewing a proposal and it was focusing on teacher preparation, would you have a question if there was no one on the team that brought teacher preparation to the table? And so it's not a requirement, and different institutions have different organizational structures. In truth, some, the teacher preparation is in the disciplinary department at the secondary level, but the teacher preparation is in the College of Education for the elementary. So we see all different kinds of designs. So they don't all require the same level of faculty expertise, but do think about what reviewers would think.
Great. We'll take just one more question, and then Kathleen, I'll leave a few for you to answer in the chat window when you switch over. So one question is, can we involve K-12 teachers as partners in the project? And so I'll say, sure, absolutely, that's certainly allowable. But remember that this is a program entitled Improving Undergraduate STEM Education. And so the focus of the work should be on the undergraduate, so the pre-service teacher. There are other ways to certainly involve in-service teachers, but they should not be the focus of the work of what's being proposed in an IUSE submission. So there are several other questions coming in. I've answered several already. Keep the questions coming. We certainly want this to be more of a discussion. Although we can't see you, we can at least get your questions and then engage in some discussion around them. But I'll continue right now with our slides just so that we can make sure that we give you the kind of the foundational information that we want you to have as you're thinking about our respective questions. So Kathleen already sort of broke down the elements that are involved in the two different tracks for IUSE. So let's kind of dissect each track a bit more right now. Let's start with the Engaged Student Learning track. So you'll hear me from henceforward just saying ESL. The ESL track focuses on the design, development, or perhaps even a full research project that involves creating, exploring, or implementing tools or resources or models. That's the ESL track. Most ESL projects focus directly on the students. So for you, this audience here, this will likely be a focus on pre-service teachers. But we do have some ESL projects that may indirectly serve students through faculty professional development efforts or solely on research on teaching and learning. ESL projects may include a range of approaches, and you see several of them listed here in the last bullet on your screen. So they may involve developing or implementing instructional methods or technology. So think about, your introductory mathematics course as an example for your pre-service teachers, and perhaps you want to test out an instructional intervention. IUSE would be a place to do that. You could also design and assess metrics to measure STEM teaching and learning of specific outcomes. Again, you see in the third bullet, professional development. So perhaps you have biology faculty teaching the science pre-service teachers, and perhaps they need some specific professional development to reach that population in terms of bridging that pedagogical and content knowledge. You may want to look at IUSE for that, and the ESL track would be appropriate. Or again, discipline-based or interdisciplinary educational research. So it does not have to solely focus on mathematics pre-service teachers or biology pre-service teachers or physics. There could be some interdisciplinary options to look at across teacher education when we're talking about IUSE. So the other track, the second track in IUSE, is the ICT, Institutional and Community Transformation track. This track has an emphasis on systemic change that can be measured at either department level, the institution level, or even I'll say a multi-institutional level, or across organizations or communities. So when you think about ICT track, you're really thinking about systemic change, right? Across a large group of people. That's how we want you to differentiate between the two tracks. Again, ICT projects may include a range of approaches. I'm going to skip down to that last bullet. So transforming high enrollment classes, so multiple sections of a particular course as an example, using evidence-based teaching practices. Developing a community of practice for a specific group of faculty to improve or sustain those evidence-based practices that you would reference in such a proposal. Or identifying best practices to guide institutional transformation across a particular theme or discipline. And then that last bullet, identify common elements across disciplines or programs, institutions, or systems that support students from underrepresented groups to be successful in STEM. So that's another possible option to look at the underrepresented student population at your institution and think about some transformative efforts for improving their instruction. And there are lots of ways that we can do that, and several project examples that we can actually give as an example. So we've already discussed most of the content on this next slide regarding the ICT projects. I'll add that ICT projects are expected to include one or more theories of change to guide the proposed work. That is a requirement. So if you're thinking about an ICT submission, you first want to make sure you have a theory of change in mind to actually ground that work. And then I'll also add that, of course, the STEM education enterprise is a very complex system. And this should be taken into account when structuring any ICT project, and not only taken into account, but given really serious thought in terms of how the different components of the project will interact to actually bring about the change that we should see for an ICT project. Okay, so I'm repeating this again just to kind of drill it home, bring it home. 2 tracks: engage student learning and institutional and community transformation. Now, here comes the extra layer. Each track has multiple levels within the track. So you can see in the first column on this respective slide that there are 3 levels associated with the ESL track, and each level comes with a different level of funding and a maximum time period for the project. Likewise, for ICT, you can see that there are different levels. There are 2 levels, and then there's also a capacity building pathway. Now, for this particular webinar, we primarily are focusing our comments and the content of the slides around levels 2 and 3, primarily because those are the levels with the next due date. That is, the due date is December 1st for proposals in levels 2 and 3. Level 1, the due date and capacity building was in August, and it'll roll back around again in February. But right now, we're going to focus primarily on levels 2 and 3. So I want to remind you to, as you're thinking about your project, really think about how much money you will need to actually pull off the work that's proposed, and not look at the maximum. So for level 2, you can go up to $600,000 as an example. For ESL, doesn't mean you have to request $600,000, but that is the maximum allowed. You may not need the whole $600,000, and you may not need the whole 3 years, and that's certainly allowable and fine for both the ESL and ICT tracks. In considering which level is appropriate for your idea, that's a very common question we get. It's important for you to consider the scale and the scope of your project. That pretty much tells you what level you need to fall into. The scale of your project refers to the number of whatever, students, or the number of faculty members, the number of departments, or whomever engaged in your work. There are no magic benchmark numbers. So we cannot tell you if you have, 2 departments or less, do this level. But we want you to think about what really makes sense and what can you make the case for. I will say that level 3 projects, for the most part, involve multiple sections of a course or large groups of faculty across multiple institutions, for example. So we want you to think about, based on whatever idea you're proposing, realistically, how many people are involved, and what is the impact of the work that I'm doing, and how much money will I realistically need to carry out that work. And that generally tells you which level you should fall into with no problem. Scope refers to the number of project components involved. So, for example, think about how many courses, or how many sections, or how many departments will be involved, or how many faculty development institutes will you need to transform this particular community, as an example. So as you're thinking, as we're talking, I want you to think about scale and scope, because that's really important in identifying which level that you actually want to apply for. The program rules are the same, but the amount of money and the timeline varies. Okay, so same thing is true for ICT project. I don't have anything particularly new to add here. Again, we're going to focus on levels 2 for ICT, so those go up to $2 million for one institution involved, and then $3 million if there are multiple institutions involved. 5-year timeline maximum for ICT projects. So remember, these are the ones that really focus heavily on institutional transformation. So you really will be talking about, free service teachers across the institution, or across multiple institutions, or even perhaps across a state for an ICT project. So keep that in mind. Again, we're looking at level 2 and 3, and you can see that the deadline is December 1st, and then after that, first Tuesday in December for the level 2 and 3. All right, so let's pause and do a quick fact check, and I'm going to channel your energy and your responses. So no cheating. You're just going to yell out your response at your computer like we were face to face. Okay, so true or false? All proposals must have a research component. I don't know if we've talked in great detail about that yet, but just shout out, what do you think? Okay, great. I think most of you said false. So it is true that IUSE accepts full research proposals. That is certainly allowable, but know that it is not required. What we do require is that proposals explain the knowledge base that the project is built on, and how this is contributing, how the project will contribute to generating new knowledge. That is a requirement, but a full research plan does not, or a research study is not a requirement for IUSE. I will say, however, that projects who choose to do a research study or who pose one or more research questions must make sure that the questions can be answered through the course of the study or through the evaluation of the project activities, the impacts, or outcomes. So this is a requirement. The research questions must be aligned with the research plan, the project activities, the outcomes, etc. So just keep that in mind. But all projects are expected to increase knowledge about effective STEM education, but the extent to the research design is up to the proposer. Okay, second question. Funds for STEM curriculum development, programmatic pathways, learning resources, assessment instruments, and faculty development may receive funding under the IUSE solicitation. Absolutely true. I know everyone got that one correct. That's what we're talking about today. IUSE is purposely a very broad program, and any of these ideas would be eligible under IUSE. And almost anything that you can think of with regards to improving undergraduate education would be eligible for an IUSE submission. Will IUSE support both STEM and non-STEM majors? This was a question that one of our attendees actually posed earlier. So you know the answer is yes. Efforts must be on improving undergraduate STEM education, but it can be for STEM majors or non-STEM majors because everybody takes STEM courses at some point during their undergraduate pathway. Proposals may focus solely on STEM teacher preparation. Oh, of course, you said, yes, absolutely. That's what this webinar is about. So we want to make the community aware that in IUSE, you can actually focus solely on pre-service teachers. And I had a question in the chat earlier about what is a pre-service teacher. And so that's just someone who is studying teacher education and who may or may not be a STEM major, but they are eligible to be the focus of an IUSE proposal. Question 5, actually, proposals should demonstrate a solid grounding in relevant literature on STEM teaching and learning. Again, that is true. So you must ground your work in the relevant literature for many reasons. I don't think I have to tell this audience why that is important. Proposals should increase knowledge about effective STEM education through posing one or more research questions or through evaluation of project activities, impacts, or outcomes. I'm going to pause and let you take that one in. So this says all submissions should do one of two things, either propose a research study or have an evaluation plan that answers some questions. So that's true. So I wanted to pause because we just spent a little bit of time talking about the research piece. So remember I said all submissions must advance knowledge. If you choose to not do that through a research study, you must have a very thorough evaluation plan that allows you to answer the questions about what knowledge is being generated. So just keep that in mind. Certainly you can have both, but at bare minimum, one or the other is required. Only universities and colleges may submit proposals. So that's actually not true. We have professional organizations who may submit through IUSE along with others. And the NSF PAPPG Proposal and Award Policy and Procedures Guide, I'm giving myself high five for actually remembering that acronym, actually outlines all the categories of people who can submit. So if you're not from an institution of higher ed, know that there are other people and entities that we do accept proposals from. All right, I think this is the last quiz question. Which of the following may receive IUSE funding? So I won't read them. I'll just pause and let you eyeball the screen. Great. I know everyone checked all the boxes. So we've talked about all of these, and certainly all of these would be eligible under IUSE support. So Kathleen, I will pause here for our next Q&A session and give you an opportunity to share any questions that you think may benefit from a larger discussion, and then we can swap seats.
So Sandra, thank you very much for this opportunity. I have to say I have been answering questions so quickly that I couldn't even keep up with where you were in the presentation. So that's wonderful that we have this many questions. There are a couple things that I want to make sure that the whole group hears. And one of these has to do with a number of questions that had to do with could they do things at the post-baccalaureate level, or teacher certification in their state is at the post-baccalaureate level. And unfortunately, this program is about improving undergraduate STEM education. So we do understand that there are states and regions where teacher certification may occur at the post-baccalaureate level, but the IUSE program focuses on undergraduates. And likewise, in engaging teachers that are already in the field, as you mentioned earlier in response, that certainly could be part of the equation. But if the focus is really on the teachers that are in the field, then that would not be appropriate for the undergraduate program, which is what this is focused on. I did not queue up.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I'm eyeballing, and I can just pull out a couple. I see one that says, "Can we allocate any funds in the budget for undergraduate students' stipend?" I think that's probably a somewhat common question. So what I'll say is that it depends on what the stipend is for. IUSE is not a scholarship program, so that's important to remember. But certainly, if you want to include funding for undergraduate research and have a stipend for the students, or there are lots of other possibilities, that's allowable within IUSE. But you just need to always say, does this align with the respective goals that I'm proposing? And if you can justify that, then that's fine. So yes, there can be funding for undergraduate stipend at IUSE, but not scholarship support. I don't think that route.
Okay, and so I'll take another one. So this person is saying they're a first-time proposer, and should they start with a level 1 as a first-time proposer, or think big and go for a level 2 or 3? I paraphrased towards the end. So it's not about you as an individual being a first-time proposer. It's more about what is the work that needs to be done. And if there is already work that has been done, either by you or you and some of your colleagues, and now, or even people at another institution, and you want to build upon it and do something to further it and advance it and a larger generation of knowledge, then you certainly could go for a level 2 or 3. But if you have an idea that you feel you need to do more exploration of, then that would be a great time to do a level 1.
Yep,
do you want
perfect.
to take one more, Sandra?
Yeah, I can take one more. Somebody says, I may not have the data I need by the December 1st submission deadline. Should I wait a year? In essence, that's the question. And so I'll say yes. If you think that the data that you need for whatever purpose, to show needs assessment or whatever purpose, is really critical to the formation of your project idea, I would definitely recommend that you wait until you have everything you need to submit a strong proposal rather than submitting something that you know is lacking. We expect IUSE to be here in 2021, so I think it's perfectly fine if you're looking at level 2 and 3 to wait till the next December deadline.
So I'm going to take one more and then move on, because there might be some confusion between this solicitation and some past ones about submission dates. So there are 3 different submission dates for this solicitation each year. And one of them is in August, and that's for track 1, level 1. and one of them is in February, and it's for level 1. The level 2 and 3 is a December deadline. Now, if you look at the solicitation, you'll see that it'll say words like "and annually thereafter." So for the deadline for track 2 and 3, it is the first Tuesday in December each year. And so this year that is December 1st. So I do encourage you to go to the solicitation 19-601. And by the way, a very easy way to get to it, is to just type into your search engine NSF 19-601 and it will pop up. Okay, Sandra, I'm going to hand the baton to you back to answer questions and keep going here.
Sounds great.
So if you're doing a research study, if the major thing that you are proposing is a research study, and it may be linked to the implementation of some things you want to do, but you're going to study it, you can do a research study with either the engaged student learning or the institutional and community transformation. Just remember that whether you do research study and have research questions and a research design, or you do a project evaluation, you must have a mechanism for generating knowledge, which means you've got to produce data and be able to analyze the data and come up with some findings. If you do a research study, and again, you have the option of doing an evaluation plan, but if you do a research study, you can create or explore or implement tools and resources and models. You can do enhanced student learning and attitudes through teaching strategies and effective curricula. So you can look at, you're trying to do certain things and you want to see, how does this impact students' feelings about and persistence in STEM? You could do a research study. And again, we use the word STEM to include all of the STEM disciplines, but you can focus just in geoscience or just in computer science. You do not have to focus in all of the disciplines. You can do a research study that looks at the diffusion of widespread practices throughout the community. This work has been going on, and to what extent is it making an impact in multiple places? And you certainly can do a research study on effective professional development, particularly of faculty, because in order to enhance and improve undergraduate education, we as faculty have to also engage in being part of the improvement. Besides research studies, and besides what we refer to often as implementation with evaluation studies, you can also seek funding for workshops or conferences. Now, these do not have a submission date. You can submit for funding to support workshops or conferences at any time. However, you should talk to a program officer in advance of this, and I suggest that you have an email trail associated with discussing the workshop or conference. Typical budgets for workshops and conferences are $50,000 to $100,000. And I've already mentioned that you should talk to a program officer if you want to pursue that. But that's certainly something that you can do. A few more details about what should be true about your proposal, in addition to the very interesting idea that you're going to be promoting or researching or studying. It should be, the work you propose should be transportable and propagable. And as I mentioned earlier, NSF does not have the financial resources to fund every institution to do the interesting and important work they would like to do to improve undergraduate education where they are. So we have to learn from it, and in learning, what you're doing should be such that another institution could take advantage of what you have developed. That doesn't mean they have to be able to just take it off the shelf and plug it in and it works. It means that they have to benefit, and it should be obvious how it could work in institutions other than just the institution or set of institutions that are proposing the work. It should include plans for encouraging, enabling, and facilitating use of findings or developments by others. Now, often people will put this information in a section called dissemination, and that is fine. But dissemination that just simply says, we will publish in journals and we will present at conferences is not particularly compelling, because reviewers look and say, what is the likelihood that these findings are going to be used? So think of stronger ways to encourage and enable the findings from your important work to be used by others. They obviously have to be evidence-based. So you do need to go to the research literature and on the topic that you're exploring. And we don't tell you what that research literature should be. It's scholarly work that you're engaging in. So you will, in your proposal, cite the literature that you have looked to and are building upon, or even refuting. There may be research that you are going to propose because you find that some of the research that you have looked at in the literature is not consistent with what you are seeing among your undergraduates, and you want to propose a way to study that. But it must be evidence-based. And we've already said it must be knowledge generating. It can't just be doing something because it would be a really great thing to do for the set of students that you serve. It would be a really great thing to do something to improve your students, but we have to learn from it. So you want to describe plans for collecting and analyzing and sharing data. And I'm going to underscore analyzing, because more and more I'm finding that proposals will talk about the data they're going to collect, but they don't describe how they're going to look at that data and analyze it in order to determine whether what they are doing is making a difference. Obviously, it should have goals and objectives for intended outcomes. You're proposing a project. You want to establish what are the goals and how would you know if it's successful. We mentioned an evaluation plan to determine the effect of the intervention. So again, this can be if you are going to use this for generating knowledge. Now, I will say that typically for level ones, you might just have an advisory group, an advisory committee. But the amount of money requested in level 2s and 3s is fairly considerable. So it is more likely here that you will also want to have an external evaluation plan. Because as a taxpayer, if you knew that we supported some institution with $2 million, you would want to know that there was an evaluation to tell how effective that was. Always include how you're going to obtain objective feedback, and that's formative and summative, so that you can improve your project throughout its implementation, so beyond year 1 and 2. So we've come to another Q&A time. Sandra, do you have any questions that you feel like everybody needs to hear the answer, or have you queued up any questions for what we should approach?
Yeah, so we're doing pretty good actually on cleaning up the Q&A chat. There are a couple that I just flagged that we may want to talk about. One is, what is an example of an evaluation that is not research?
So I'd be happy to take this one.
Great, I thought you would.
Because this is a pet peeve of mine. It's what I call compliance evaluation. An evaluation plan that says, they said they were going to make 20 widgets, and by golly, I'm going to count the number of widgets they make. Or they said they were going to hold 3 advisory board meetings a year, and I'm going to look to see, did they hold 3 advisory board meetings a year? Or they said that they were going to collect survey data from 32 teachers to inform their pre-service program. And I'm going to look to see, did they collect survey data from 32 teachers? That kind of compliance checking does not generate any knowledge. Now, if the project evaluation says we're going to look at that survey data and see how it informed the work of the project as it moved forward, then you're getting closer to a useful evaluation. Sandra, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a perfect response. I don't have anything to add. Yep, perfect. Okay, another question is, can STEM-based practices in combination with agriculture, as an example, be funded through IUSE? So I'll just say quickly that we might have addressed this by now, but IUSE has no requirement that the focus has to be on a specific STEM area. However, in totality, remember that, again, the title of the program is Improving Undergraduate STEM Education. So there has to be some focus on improvement of undergraduate STEM education. You can couple different disciplinary areas with others. That's perfectly fine. But just remember where the focus has to lie. So I'll say, just without having any other information, it's fine to include agriculture, but that should not be the focus of the work, because NSF does not fund agriculture as a part of the STEM disciplines, but certainly it's allowable to be an IUSE project, but there has to be more to that project than just studying the agriculture piece. Another question is, so if conferences and peer-reviewed journals are not sufficient, then what else can be done? Do you mean that PIs arrange for ways to conduct professional development workshops in school districts? So Kathleen, maybe that's something in response to you said. I might have missed it while I was answering questions. Do you remember saying anything about that?
I remember saying that conferences and peer-reviewed journals may not be viewed as sufficient by the reviewers because it doesn't tell them how you are going to encourage the use of your findings. So I think what you just read was they were also saying, could you propose workshops? Certainly, and it might not be workshops for school districts. It might be workshops to engage faculty that do pre-service education in other institutions to utilize the research that you have done. But I'm going to turn the question around and say, think about if you read in a journal some interesting findings, what would compel you to actually utilize those findings? And think about it from that standpoint.
Great. Kathleen, there are some follow-up questions to your comments about research and evaluation. So I'm just going to read a couple and see if you want to add anything to it. And if not, you can feel free to throw me the ball, but I know you love talking about this, so it's good. So someone said, thanks so much for your follow-up, Kathleen. What's an example of an evaluation that is research? And then someone else said, what's the difference between research and evaluation?
Well, this is a very fuzzy area. and let me say up front, and you know this, Sandra, everyone does not agree that there is a strong demarcation between evaluation and research. So step back for a second, and if what you are proposing has questions that can be answered with yes or no, then those are not useful research questions. But if you have questions that you propose to study that are going to have answers about how and why and for whom, then you're coming closer to a mechanism for generating knowledge. So rather than trying to decide whether it's evaluation or research, think about the questions that will be proposed in your work, the data that will be collected, how it will be analyzed, and the importance of what could be found. And regardless of whether you label that a research design or you label it as an evaluation plan, is less important than having important questions that will generate knowledge and for which empirical data, and that can be qualitative or quantitative, you can do mixed methods, but you would describe how the data is going to be analyzed. Do you want to add to that, Sandra?
No, I think that's perfect. So why don't we, Kathleen, continue moving and finish up the last chunk, and then we can take any questions in the last 15 minutes or so that may remain.
Okay, can I answer just one more? There's a question here about could they fund teacher candidates for practice tests in STEM areas? Mm-hmm. And it depends on why you're want to do that. If you're asking could you use IUSE funds just for the purpose of providing these teachers with the resources to take the praxis test, the answer would be no. But if you want to study what's happening here, so I'm going to say perhaps you are going to do a comparison study of students that took certain courses and certain seminars and a particular emphasis towards helping them be teachers, including their knowledge related to the praxis. And you're going to compare them to another group of students that did not have benefit of those specific seminars because you want to see if it makes any difference. Then it's necessary for those students in groups in the two cohorts, the ones that took the seminars and the ones that didn't. It's necessary for them to both take the praxis, in which case now the funding of the praxis is necessary for you to do the research comparison. Okay, we're going to move on. Yep. Keep asking. And I'll just, Sandra may have already said this, but the questions you ask are often more useful than the slides and the scripted comments that we're making. So please ask your questions. They help everyone. So we're going to talk a little bit about tips for success. I hope I didn't advance too far. I think I might have. I'm going to go back one slide. I wasn't seeing advance. There we go. I'm going to go back one more and just make sure. Okay. You want to build on what is known. And again, this is talking about looking to the research literature. And although there may be some great things that you want to build upon that were written in 1973, you want more of your references to be recent than that long ago. You want to have a well-designed plan to collect data, and you want to say what data is going to be collected. And here again, you see that I have highlighted in yellow the methods of analysis. This is an area that people often do not give a strong enough description of how they intend to analyze the data. Include a mechanism to evaluate the success of the project. So name what you mean by success, and how are you going to know that you have achieved success? Explain how findings and materials will be shared. This goes back to the dissemination that I commented on earlier, and you want to think about beyond sharing, how do you make it possible for others to actually use the findings from your work and hopefully even adopt or adapt what you have found. Address the sustainability of your project efforts. It may be that the work you do in your project will result in changes in the curriculum. So you don't have to keep doing the work to change the curriculum. The sustainability is that now you have added 2 new courses and removed a course that is no longer necessary. So you describe that. Collaborate as needed with other investigators or institutions or communities. Especially in level 2s and 3s, these are more complex projects, so the likelihood that you need a team of individuals, that no one individual or 2 individuals has sufficient expertise and perspective is likely. But we don't tell you who has to be on the team. You want to tell us, here's what we're doing, here's the team, because we need, in the work we're doing, even though we're doing it in the space of physics education, we need some social behavioral researchers to bring their tools into this work. Again, we don't say who has to be involved, but we do say you want to explain who is involved. Know the proposal section. So here they are. If you've not put in a proposal before, there will be a cover page that the system automatically generates, whether you go into research.gov or you go into grants.gov or you go into Fastlane at NSF. 3 different ways right now that you could submit a proposal. Any one of them will generate a cover page. It will also automatically generate a table of contents. You have to write a 1-page summary in which you indicate the intellectual merit, that's the quality and importance of the work, and the broader impacts, that's the benefit and to whom is going to benefit from the results of your work. Then you have 15 pages to describe not only what you're going to do, but how. The how is so important. How you're going to do it, who's going to do it, and how you're going to measure success. You will be able to indicate a list of references that you are using to undergird your work, which you can cite within the 15 pages. You will include the biographical sketches of the team that is doing this work. There will be a budget and a budget justification, or budgets and budget justifications, because perhaps there are going to be multiple institutions and multiple budgets. You will describe the current and pending support of the PI team. So this will include anything that they have currently being considered by NSF in any program, or anything that they, those are pending proposals, but also if they've got current funding, if they're currently working, it will include that. And basically, you're indicating what they're engaged in and how much time they're spending. So they might be spending 2 months, they could be spending 0.05 months. You will indicate facilities and equipment at your institution. This gives an indication of some of the resources that are needed. And by the way, if there is a PI on the project that is not going to get any financial compensation because they're going to be doing this as a normal part of the work that they're supposed to do at their institution, but they're going to work on the project, and you want the reviewers to know that, then you don't put them on the budget because you're not going to request any money, but you put them in the other resources. So in the document, facilities, equipment, and other resources, you say Dr. So-and-so will be working 2 months a year on this project as a part of Dr. So-and-so's normal responsibilities. You may include letters of commitment, not letters of support. Letters of commitment are defined in the PAPG, that's the Proposal and Award Policy and Procedures Guide. So make sure that you look at that. But don't have just letters that say, we know these people, they do great work and this would be a great project and we think it's really important. That's a letter of support and they're not allowable and it could actually be returned without ever being reviewed. All of that work done, and you have letters that are not admissible. Don't include in the supplementary documents anything that is not specifically specified as allowable. So don't put, here's the comparison of the current set of courses our pre-service teachers take and the proposed set of courses. Don't do anything like that because, again, that can be returned without review. Only include information in the supplementary documents that the solicitation specifically says are allowable. And basically, that's letters of commitment and collaboration. Every proposal that comes in NSF has a data management plan. There are guidelines, again, in the PAPG related to data management plan. If you put money on the budget on the postdoc line, then you must have a postdoc mentoring plan. But if there's no money on the postdoc line, then you don't have to have one. And then you must also submit what is called a single copy document that describes for each of the PIs and co-PIs their collaborators and other affiliations. Again, you want to go to the PAPG for guidance on this. Additional tips for success. Look at the program solicitation. And again, the program solicitation right now is NSF 19-601. By the way, if you decide not to submit this year, you always want to look and make sure you're using the most recent one. We do change them. We don't necessarily change them every year, but there are times when we do. So you always want to look at that. And again, I mentioned the PAPG. And you always want to make sure you're using the most current one. NSF 20-1 is the most current one. We typically release a new one every January, but this year, because of COVID, it was not put in effect until June. But typically, it goes into effect, it's released in January and goes into effect in February. Test drive Fastlane or grants.gov or research.gov. You can put it in any of those ways. By test drive, we mean go in and make sure you know how to use it. Make sure your institution is registered. Make sure the PIs and co-PIs are registered. You want to do this weeks before the due date. You do not want to be doing this the day of, because any proposal that's not in by 5 p.m., your local time, won't come in at all. So be very careful to make sure that your institution is registered and that every PI and co-PI is also registered. Let your sponsored research office, different universities and colleges have different names, but there is some office in your institution that is responsible for actually submitting proposals. You want to alert them ahead of time And if you can get it to them ahead of time, that's great, but I would follow up on the day of and make sure they submitted it. Now, they can submit it the day before, they can submit it 2 weeks before, they can submit it a month before. But what you don't want to find out is that you submitted it to them and they didn't submit it to us, because it won't be allowable. Follow the page and font size limits. Again, those are in the PAPG. Be aware of other projects and advances in the field. This is, again, saying make sure you look to the literature, cite the literature, provide detail. Now, here's a suggestion that's not on this list. Use headings. Point people being reviewers first and NSF, to what you're talking about. So, here are the questions we are studying. Bingo. Here are the sets of instruments we're going to use to collect the data. Here are the methodologies we are going to use to analyze the different types of data. And they're different methodologies, so you have to do more. But what I'm saying is call attention to it so the reviewers don't have to hunt for it. Here's the innovation that we're investigating. Label it. If any of the PIs or co-PIs have had funding support within the last 5 years, you must discuss within the 15 pages the prior results, even if it's not related to this project. You have to discuss it for at least one project for each PI and co-PI if they've had funding within the last 5 years. Again, I'm going to encourage you to look at the PAPG because it talks about what must be included in discussion of the prior results. It is not sufficient to say co-PI so-and-so had a grant to improve the number of teachers of mathematics, and we produced and we did it. You have to give us the award number. You have to give us the results, and results are not the abstract description. I'm not going to go any further into that. Please, please, please look at the PAPG and include evaluation, or at least include feedback on how you're looking at the project. But again, in these really large financial projects, it's really strongly encouraged that you have an evaluation plan with timelines and benchmarks. And again, formative and summative. Oops. I'm going to stop for a second and then take a breath and then talk about some resources that can be helpful to you. I've already mentioned many times the PAPG. That's the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedure Guide. You really want to go to that. You are welcome to look at the Guidelines for Education Research and Development. This was a document co-developed between the U.S. Department of Education and the National Science Foundation. You are not required to use the Common Guidelines, but it can certainly serve as a useful resource to you, especially around doing educational research. Look at the NSF Merit Review Overview. Every proposal is reviewed against 2 merit review criteria. It doesn't matter what the program is at NSF. So intellectual merit, again, I talked to briefly, quality and importance, but there's so much more. And broader impacts, again, who benefits, but there's so much more. So please go and look at the NSF Merit Review Overview. And then there are solicitation-specific FAQs on the IUSE website. So we encourage you to go to those FAQs. So in addition to answering questions today, go to those FAQs. And many of your questions may be answered there. While our major focus today has been on IUSE, and within IUSE teacher prep, with the knowledge that you could put in a proposal that is purely on improving undergraduate engineering education and has nothing to do with teacher prep, but we know that. But we were focusing on teacher prep. But with that knowledge, here's some other programs that you may be interested in. The Robert Noyce Teacher Scholarship Program, including Track 4, which is a research track. By the way, several of the questions you asked appear to be about supporting with some financial aid undergraduates, so certainly the Robert Noyce Teacher Scholarship Program could be useful there. If you want to do research on teacher effectiveness, persistence, or retention in high-need schools, Track 4 in the Noyce program supports that. EHR Core Research. This is another program that supports educational research. In this case, it is more fundamental research. So in IUSE, you may choose to do an implementation of some treatment and study it. But in ECR, you would be focusing more on fundamental research less than an implementation. That's not to say you can't do some implementation. And then another program that you may be interested in is the Advanced Technological Education Program. This focuses more, as the title says, on technology education, but it engages community colleges. IUSE can be supportive of research and generation of knowledge related to community colleges, but so can ATE. So it's not to dissuade you from IUSE, these three resources here. This is to say there's IUSE and there's more that you can seek funding through. So we've reached another moment of Q&A. Sandra, do you have some questions that you think everybody would benefit from?
So, let's see, I was in the middle of typing one. I'm going to close this here. I think we've addressed most of them. Actually, there's one that I pulled out, and we only have about 8 minutes, so if anyone has others, feel free to send them in. There are a couple questions around what constitutes an external evaluator, and, you know, can this person be from the same institution? So I'll just add that it is fine for the external evaluator to be from the same institution. The key is that the evaluator should be external to the project. So that means they should have an objective lens to actually evaluating the project. And so for us in the teacher preparation space, for the most part, we see this as someone being outside of the department where the project is housed, certainly someone who does not supervise or is supervised by the PI or the PI team, and who really has a lens to be objective about the work that they're evaluating. So, you know, especially larger institutions have an evaluation unit on campus. It's perfectly fine to use those sorts of entities at the institution, but just make sure that the person, the evaluator, is actually external to the project. And I'll say that this is primarily the way we think about things within the teacher preparation sort of submissions that we review. But remember, IUSE is a very large program, and I think Kathleen alluded to it earlier that there are lots of different perspectives on evaluation, external evaluation, and research. So it may vary across the different disciplinary areas. Okay, and then I was actually typing a response to this comment, but it's the only one left in the chat window, so I'll just read it. It says, I didn't see a list of project personnel on the required documents list, but my grants office has been encouraging us to submit this at my institution. Is this required for IUSE? So, Kathleen, I don't remember exactly what was on that list of stuff that what we had for inclusion, but I'll just say that there's no special document that has a list of project personnel that's required. We certainly require the bio sketches for anyone on the leadership team, the current and pending forms, which again goes to the leadership team, and the collaborators document. But that's all. There's no other extra list that's required. Okay, and since we have 5 more minutes, oh, go ahead. Yes, Kathleen.
Well, I was going to say we have 2 more questions that have come in.
Yeah, that's right.
We're hoping to expand on some pilot curricula that are specially geared to work in a remote learning context. Yay! Is there somebody in particular at IUSE we should talk to about that? It depends on the nature of what you're trying to do with the remote learning. If it's so, I'm going to just suggest that you send Sandra or I, or copy both of us, a little bit more information on this. But we certainly would encourage proposals that are helping to advance what everyone is experiencing in their learning environments right now, and that is online learning or hybrid learning. So those proposals are certainly encouraged, but in terms of a particular person, I'd want to know more about, are you talking about a particular discipline or that kind of thing?
Yeah. You want to take the last question in the chat, Kathleen?
The one about special education?
Yep.
Sure.
I can do it.
Anything, go for it.
You may want to just catch a breath. I thought about it. So the question is, would it apply to special education pre-service teachers? And I think the IT is just the IUSE program. So again, yes, sure. Special education pre-service teachers have to take math. They have to take biology. They have to take several other STEM subject areas. So that would be perfectly fine. There's no restriction on the type of pre-service teacher. As long as we're improving undergraduate STEM education, we're on board. How long does it take to receive a response about your proposal being funded or not? That is a question with a magical answer. And I just say that because the answer is really, it kind of depends. We certainly try to respond to the majority of submissions within 6 months of the submission date. So somewhere around that time, you should hear something back in terms of funded or not funded.
Okay.
Is curriculum
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kathleen. No, you go.
Is curriculum design and development essential for the engaged student learning proposal? No, it is not. You tell us what you're going to do in that space. Somebody could propose something that is totally about faculty development and might not touch on those things at all. So you tell us what is it. Way back at the beginning, we asked you what you wanted to do that you needed money to do, and now we want you to put your head together and think about that. If you're looking for the Robert Noyce program, do NSF 17-541 in your browser, NSF 17-541, and you should find it. Last words, Sandra?
No, nothing else from me, but thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a delight. Thank you for your questions, and please reach out to us if you have questions, and most importantly, consider IUSE if you are working with pre-service teachers, or even if you're not and you're working with the undergraduate population at large.
And I'll add one thing more. If you're not going to submit a proposal and you'd like to be a reviewer, send us your CV and tell us you'd like to be a reviewer. We're always looking for new reviewers. The Noyce is...
I'm sending it to him in the chat, Kathleen. So.
Okay. So I'm going to just say thank you as well to my colleague Sandra, who's very patient, and to all of you. We're excited that you're excited about this opportunity.
Okay, good luck, guys, and have a great afternoon or evening, depending on where you are.